Before I get on with my official duties here, I want to just steal the microphone and give a shout out to all the ladies of the class of 97 that are here. It's awesome to see y'all, so even you Fields. But congratulations. And then for my old friend Rob, I'm so proud of you, man. The future is so bright for you, brother, so congratulations. Roman numeral 1, period. Good evening, everyone. Capital A, period. It's my distinct privilege to represent the thousands of students who Mr. Joseph Jarrell taught over his nearly 30 years at McIntosh. Capital B, period. I'm going to keep going here. So I walked into Mr. Jarrell's classroom for the first time just over 25 years ago, not really sure what to expect. Capital C, period. Little did I know I was walking into history, both literally and figuratively. Roman numeral 2, period. You see, Mr. Jarrell's an institution, one formed by precision, passion, and shall I say, obsessive-compulsive enthusiasm for his profession. You got to think the 300 at Thermopylae, like that level of commitment to his craft and his students. Capital A, period. He wanted to make sure we got the history right, so he dictated the appropriate notes in outline form, and we are obliged to copy them all, chapter and verse, right down to the Roman numerals, capital letters, and precise punctuation. Capital B, period. I still use such organization today, as evidenced by the script I'm reading now that Mr. Jarrell dictated to me over the phone a few weeks ago. So how am I doing so far with it? Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, Mr. Jarrell cared so deeply for his students and for history that he left nothing to chance, even if it meant dictating notes to a bunch of skeptical sophomores. This habit was perhaps a bit eccentric, but as I look back, it was his unique way of showing us not just the importance of the material, but also the value of organization and rigor. Though perhaps lost to the annals of time, Mr. Jarrell did, sometime shortly after I graduated, develop a kink in his armor. He lost his voice. And by that I mean he literally talked his way into surgery. So I got this call while I was away at my freshman year at school, and Mr. Jarrell asked if I could substitute for him while he missed a few days of school, which I'm fairly certain were the first days he'd missed in decades. I, of course, said yes, and he naturally gave me marching orders and a script, and then we conspired to, in all likelihood, break a few county rules about what is required to be a substitute teacher. I think the statute of limitations on conspiracy to fraudulently substitute teach is passed, so I think I'm safe to speak publicly on the matter. I just hope I don't get back to my ship and find my security clearance revoked. But in any case, as I reflect on my 3-day teaching career, I'm honestly surprised that Mr. Jarrell didn't learn sign language and then force all of his students to do the same just so he wouldn't have to miss a day of class while he couldn't talk. Remember, when it comes to accomplishing the mission, this guy's a Spartan. So, dictating endless notes, seeking out a former student who had clearly drank the Kool-Aid to fill in for you, rarely missing a day of class. These things demonstrate the depth of Mr. Jarrell's devotion to his life's calling. It's not what we say, it's what we do. While I was in college, I found myself in a suburb outside of Munich, Germany, reading a sign that said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to relive it." I thought to myself then, and still remember now, how closely that admonishment mirrors Mr. Jarrell's most important reason for studying history. We have to learn from the past. So as I reflected on my visit to Dachau, I felt blessed to have had a history teacher who was truly all in. For all of the right reasons. not just to bring the past to life, but to use it as a guidepost for the future. Well, I suspect that some of your students weren't as enamored as I about history's fun and fascinating facts. I'd be willing to bet that they all are better citizens for having been in your class. And I think that is the true calling of those who teach, to impart the world with young men and women ready to act as responsible citizens. Mr. Jarrell, I hope my kids have a teacher like you when they get to high school. You know, and as Churchill might have said, never have so many owed so much to one history teacher. So, congratulations on this well-deserved honor. You are truly the top banana. So it's my honor to present Mr. Joseph Jarrell.
First, I too want to thank Sil Eifert for all of her fine work in organizing this. If you looked carefully at the program, there are some requirements in order to be inducted in the Hall of Fame. If you are being inducted as an athlete, as is the case of Britt and Deanna, you must have graduated at least 10 years ago. If you're being inducted because of your service work, as is true of Rob, you must have graduated at least 20 years ago. I'm being inducted as longtime faculty, and the requirement is to still be breathing. So I'm very glad to be here and meet that qualification. 31 years ago, I came to McIntosh. In the spring of my first year of teaching, Fayette Community School decided to offer some classes in the summer for middle school, elementary students in academic fields. For many years, they had offered sports, camps, and other items. And they asked teachers, would you be willing to teach something, and would you write a proposal? So I wrote a proposal to have a 10-hour class, 2 days a week, a 10-hour class, 5 days a week, 2 days, on World War II. And it was intended for middle school students. The minimum enrollment was 8. And through a series of problems, most of those classes ended up being canceled. This was before the internet. The community school had a little trouble getting the publicity done. Most kids didn't know about it. But I got a call from the community school director, and he said, hey, we don't have 8 students. We have 3 that would like to take your 10-hour class on World War II. Would you teach it just for these 3 students? But let me tell you first, they're not middle school. They're 4th and 5th graders. And I said, sure. Andrew Roy was one of those 3 young men that summer. I taught it at Huddleston. He rode his bicycle as a 10-year-old to Huddleston, parked it outside one of the classroom windows so that after our 2 hours were up, he could climb out the window, get on his bicycle, and head home. So 30 years ago, I met Andrew and was so impressed at a young man who had just finished the 4th grade. Phenomenal knowledge of history, phenomenal interest in history. And then, of course, 5 years later, 25 years ago, he was in my history class, one of the most memorable of my 4,500 students. So as I thought about who I would like to introduce me, I wanted it to be a student. I thought about my 4,500 students. I could eliminate some because I did want them to say nice things. But I thought about Andrew, and I thought about a number of things. I would like to mention the co-conspirator. In 1997, Andrew indeed was a freshman at the Naval Academy, and I had to have voice surgery. And it was supposed to have been done over Christmas break, but it had to be moved back a week. And in those days, exams were not until January, so I was missing 4 teaching days. I videotaped one lesson, and our school principal, Stuart Bennett, knowing the caliber of student that Andrew had been, gave special permission for him to substitute. Now, when he showed up to substitute on the first day, Stuart Bennett gave him 2 videotapes and says, "You need to watch these now, and you're certified to substitute." Something, I assure you, that would not have been done for the average person. But the principal knew, as well as I knew, the caliber of person, the intelligence of Andrew Roy. He, of course, went on to become a history major at the Naval Academy. And in fact, during that time that he was at Annapolis, we went to Washington, D.C. My wife, daughter, and I went to Washington, D.C. He carried my daughter, who was about a year and a half old at that time, on his shoulders for much of that tour. Andrew, by the way, is a commander in the Navy, having graduated from the Naval Academy, having spent 18 years in the Navy. This summer became the commander of the USS Pinckney, 315 men aboard. I'm so glad to have had a little part in influencing his life. And I was so honored when I called him in May. I didn't expect, with his schedule, with him living in San Diego, with all the things that were happening, that he would be able to come. I am so honored that he flew a couple of days ago from San Diego, will fly back tomorrow, and was able to introduce me tonight. I'd like to thank a number of other people as well. My wife, we married just weeks before I started teaching at McIntosh, 1988. Her support over the years, her most recent support when we were needing to gather pictures for the video presentation and sort through pictures, and she willingly, after I pointed out that, "Dear, if you help with this, when I die, you'll already have a presentation at the funeral." So, after a little persuasion, she agreed. Now, I will have to admit, halfway through the project, even though I had told her there was other motivation for this, I said, "Look, you'll have it for the funeral." And they're doing this. J.J. Taylor is doing this free. They're not charging us anything. But about halfway through the project, she commented, "This has been a lot of work, and I'm pulling together all these pictures, and I really think our kitchen needs to be remodeled, and I think we need new cabinets. I hope you have enjoyed the $20,000 video presentation that you have seen tonight. I plan to watch it many times." I'm also very proud of my daughter, our only child, who's now 20 years old, 4.0, junior accounting major. Yes, I would love her to have taught history. But accounting, I've been thinking this through, a very successful field in which to go. She is our only child. Children have a lot to do with the decision as to which nursing home you go into. So I'm thinking that this is going to be good with her field in accounting. Just received an internship offer with Price Waterhouse Coopers. And teachers have to think about things like this, nursing homes. My sister, who works in a school district in California, told me of a lady she works with who casually mentioned one day, "Now, when I go to a nursing home, I do not want it to have any employees that I taught." And later, the lady mentioned it again, and she said, "I am very serious about this. When I go to a nursing home, I do not want anybody working there that was in one of my classes." And so my sister said, what is the deal? And the lady said, "Do you know how many times I have told children when they ask me to go to the bathroom, no?" "Do you know how many times I have said, I think you can wait a while? Do you know how many times I've said, hold it? No, I don't want to go to a nursing home where I have a former student. Now, my daughter, I do appreciate she is concerned about my welfare, so I know she will do well in that area. 3 years ago, she had ACL surgery, and for a couple of days, she was going to need a wheelchair. And so we were talking about this to go back to school and getting just the right wheelchair. And with all seriousness, no humor at all, she finally said, "Now, Dad, just think about it. You're going to need one in a short time anyway. If you would just go ahead and buy one, we wouldn't have to worry about trying to figure this out." So I appreciate her interest in my well-being. You know, this is a weekend that we're reflecting on the past. And this weekend, I'm reflecting a great deal on a woman who had enormous influence on my life. 54 years ago, I sat in her fourth grade class. Not only was she a great influence then, but for years to come. Beginning that year and for the next several years, I would go the week before school began and the week after school ended and assist her. When I was a senior in high school, we had a special program. I went one day a week to her school. At that time, she was teaching third grade. For 3 months, I assisted with recess. And then for 3 months, she allowed me to teach third grade social studies. So, another violation of the substitute rule, I'm sure. But her influence made me decide that year that that's what I wanted to do. My senior year in high school, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a teacher. 2 reasons I became a teacher. One of them was the idea of influencing others, because teachers were such a huge influence in my life. I'm delighted tonight that my fourth grade teacher from Dawson Street Elementary in LaGrange, Georgia, is here, Mrs. Partridge. Would you stand, Mrs. Partridge? Can you help her stand, Walter? Yeah. I have kept in contact with her much through the years. And in fact, a few years ago, she knew that I regularly sponsored some trips abroad. And in 2010, I sent her some information. She had said, I really would like to go on one of those trips. And I sent her some information. And in 2011, she traveled with a group of Macintosh students and some adults to China. My daughter was 11 at the time, and when I first told her, I'm so excited that Mrs. Partridge is going to be going with us, her eyes were big. She said, "Dad, your fourth grade teacher is still alive?" This was 10 years ago. And very fortunately, she is still alive today. This past Memorial Day weekend, and you saw in the presentation, I'm standing with her at the Nixon Library in Los Angeles. For a few years, she was in California living with her son. So a year and a half ago, I was able to see her when we were traveling there. She's now back in LaGrange, and Memorial Day weekend, we had breakfast together along with another former fourth grade student, that same class. She's accompanied tonight by a longtime friend of mine from first grade through 12th grade in that same fourth grade class. I did have to tell her on Memorial Day weekend as we were ordering at IHOP, Mrs. Partridge, when 2 of your former fourth grade students are sitting here and ordering from the senior citizen menu, it begins to make you think a little bit, doesn't it? The shoulders of many people, and one of them is Ellen Partridge. I appreciate so much the influence that she's had in my life. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you to my wife, to my daughter, to Mrs. Partridge, to some wonderful colleagues from Macintosh High School that I've been able to see again tonight and on this weekend. A man much wiser than any of us said in the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon, there's a time for everything. There's a season for everything. A time to be born a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to tear down, a time to build, a time to weep, a time to laugh. This weekend has been a time to remember. I have spent my entire 41 years as an educator trying to convince students remembering is a good thing. And not just for a test, but remembering is a good thing. One of the reasons I became a teacher was to hopefully have an influence on people. The other was to try to communicate my love and appreciation for history. And occasionally when a student would say something like, Mr. Gerald, why do we have to study this stuff? Or, Mr. Gerald, all these people we are studying are dead. They're not. Their influence, their memory lives on. And so it is with this weekend that we've had an opportunity to pause and remember. And I remember my 27 very good years at McIntosh, my 36 years of teaching. Once when I mentioned to someone I had taught for 36 years, and for the last 4 I've worked for a textbook company, but I mentioned I was in the classroom for 36 years, and the person responded, "You know, most murderers don't serve that long." The last few years I was at McIntosh, about the last 5 years, I was beginning to have young men and women raise their hand and say, "You taught my mom in this classroom." And I was at room 219 for 27 years. "You taught my dad in this classroom." One of the things that eventually led me to decide to leave teaching was I dreaded the day that someone would say, "You taught my grandmother right in this classroom." As I left teaching 4 years ago, I told my students, let me give you a life lesson. Choose a career about which you can be passionate. Find a job where they pay you to do what you love doing. Sometimes I would tell students, they pay me to do this. I often would do that right in the middle of the final exam. They pay me to do this. It's a great thing. I've been very blessed, very honored, very fortunate to have done what I loved to do. To have tried to influence people, young people, to try to communicate the great love and appreciation I have for history. There's a time for everything. And this weekend has been a good time for all of us to remember how blessed, how fortunate, and for those of us being inducted tonight, how honored we are to have been associated with McIntosh High School. Thank you.